Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Trump rallied the faithful in Florence, South Carolina over the weekend, and it was a big turnout.
Oh, yeah.
No question about that. And he had this to say about critics of his personality when it came to the world stage.
The fake news said my personality would get us into a war. I'm telling you, that guy's going to get us into a war. But actually, my personality is what kept us out of war. I was the only president in nearly 4 decades who did not get America into any new conflicts. Instead, I brought our troops and our wonderful children back home. I brought them back home where they belong.
He went on to say Russia, meaning Putin, knew better than to tangle with Trump.
I speak for everyone here tonight when I say we are praying for the proud people of Ukraine. They are going through hell. They are fighters, and God bless them all. Make no mistake, however, that Russia would not have dared to annex 1 inch of territory if I was in the White House. In fact, they never did it when I was there. A lot of people ask the question, how come they never did it when Trump was president? And China, he said they knew better. It is true. As the only president of the 21st century on whose watch Russia did not invade another country, and neither did anyone else. They knew. Under our administration, we had peace through strength. That's what it was. Our country was safe and the world was calm because America was strong.
That's an argument you'll be hearing Trump make for the rest of this campaign cycle and maybe the next one as well. Now, on the other side, President Biden, the two presidents here, President Biden offered this on the prospect of Russia using chemical weapons, which is sort of the next stage of Putin aggression that is being debated at present in terms of what will the response be if he does it, as the Russians are telegraphing it by suggesting that Ukraine will use chemical weapons. That's a tell that Putin may be ready to use chemical weapons and make this even more ghastly than it already is. Here's what Biden had to say about that.
I'm not going to speak about the intelligence, but Russia would pay a severe price if they use chemical weapons.
They pay a severe price.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I'm not sure, because on Friday in Pennsylvania, he had this to say about staving off World War III.
And we will not, although we will not fight the Third World War in Ukraine. Putin's war against Ukraine was never be a victory. Democrats are rising to meet the moment, rallying the world on the side of peace and security. We're showing the strength and we'll never falter. But look, the idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III, okay? Let's get it straight here, guys. That old expression, don't kid a kidder.
Ew, stop.
With that old expression, don't kid a kidder, I don't know what that means.
Right.
Maybe
this guy's in charge.
Maybe we can get some help in terms of ciphering the president, the current one, from our friend Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, don't kid a kidder. That would be World War III if we escalated to offensive weapons, but there will be severe consequences if Russia uses uses chemical weapons. Can you help us square that circle?
Yeah, I'd like to say it's amateur hour at the White House, but I don't want to insult amateurs all over the world. Look, there's two facets to diplomacy, which is not about. Everybody thinks diplomacy is about negotiating. It's not. Diplomacy is about what you say to your opponent or your adversary or your friend to influence their behavior. And there's two sides to that. There's the public side, And then there's the private side, which we never see, which is sometimes done through back channels, through third-party countries. Sometimes it's done in secret negotiations, like when Kissinger was negotiating with China about recognition. You go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the different things that were said in public and the different things that were said in private. In private, if you want to say to the Russians in private, look, you guys realize you touch 1 inch of NATO territory and it's Katie bar the door. But short of that, we're going to do everything we can to support the Ukrainians, but we're not going to be a party to this conflict. That's fine, because you're actually putting a red line out that they probably would accept as meaningful because it's done in private. In public, you don't say nonsense that actually makes you look weaker. Because that actually encourages your opponent to be more aggressive. And if anybody should have learned anything in dealing with the Russians, when you give the Russians a unilateral concession for nothing, the Russians see that as weakness, and they seek to take advantage of you. Conversely, when you show strength and you warn the Russians, or you put a red line out and you demonstrate the willingness to enforce that, then the Russians take you seriously. So everything that Biden said was nonsense. And conversely, if you look at Trump, people didn't like the orange hair and the tweeting and whatever, but what they did not see, and if you talk to people who actually were in the White House, what Trump told the Russians in private scared the hell out of the Russians, and that's why they stopped. And the reality is well, people say, well, who could have deterred this? Because now we know that Putin made his actually decision in January to invade. The reality is if 9 months ago when this had started, we did everything that we are doing today. We front-loaded all the support and everything to the Ukrainians, and we sanctioned the heck out of these guys. If we'd done all that at the front end, Putin would have been deterred.
So what are we going to do, and what is the plan if chemical warfare is used, if there's a nuclear weapon that is used, and if Russia strikes Poland?
Well, those are three very different things. Look, I think if Russia strikes Poland, that you have attacked a NATO country, and that Poland would turn to the rest of NATO and say, hey, and then what I suspect would happen is what I would call a proportional response, right? So depending upon what the Russians did, the NATO response to that would be proportional. So they wouldn't escalate to starting World War III. My guess is if they would attack the forces that attacked the Polish thing. So if that was an Air Force thing, they might take out a base or they may take out a unit. So that's called proportionality. That's my guess of what would happen if they actually attacked NATO territory. And if they escalated beyond that, then I think NATO would respond beyond that. I think if they use chemical or nuclear weapons inside of inside of Ukraine, there will obviously be an escalated humanitarian effort. There's going to be a lot of fear. Your stock portfolio is going to be really bad. But I do think Russia will be further isolated and for a longer period of time. And this will put a lot of strain on China, and it'll ripple across a whole bunch of things. But will NATO take military action against Russia because they use weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine? And my answer would probably not.
Stavridis, the former NATO Supreme Commander, Admiral James Stavridis, said over the weekend, if chemical weapons are used, then NATO should train Ukrainian pilots and give Ukraine planes to enforce their own no-fly zone.
Well, that's a stupid statement, and let me tell you why it's stupid. Because we can provide any kind of legitimate aid to Ukraine that we want, and there's no constraint on that. And the stupidity of saying, well, if they get more aggressive, then we'll actually do something. That's just stupid. That's what got us into this war to begin with, because we are self-deterring. There is no limit to the assistance that we can provide Ukraine to defend itself. And trying to warn people that say, well, if you start blowing stuff up, we'll help them more. That's just nonsense, right? So if you're going to help Ukraine, give them the resources that they need so they can defend themselves. But don't sit back there and repeat the stupidity of saying, well, we can do more, if you get more aggressive. I mean, look, we were all kids in the schoolyard. Does anybody ever remember one case where somebody went to a bully and said, if you smack me in the face one more time, I'm going to tell the teacher? And that worked.
How did you interpret this op-ed from the head of a Beijing-based NGO in the New York Times over the weekend, it's time to give Russia an off-ramp. China can help. He writes, achieving a multilateral resolution to the crisis in Ukraine will be a difficult and risky challenge, but there's no country better placed to do so than China. Is that an indication that China wants this over?
Well, yeah, it is, but it's also the very Chinese way of essentially instigating the whole thing, pushing the Russians over the cliff, giving them all the back, and then saying, "Oh yeah, and we're the ones that can negotiate an end to them."
But have they? But does this indicate that they've tired of Putin's foray into Ukraine? They're signaling to him, knock it off or get it done or end this one way or the other.
Yeah, well, they have very little capacity to actually do that, and I doubt that they seriously think that Putin's going to take that advantage. I think what they say is, look, what do we have to lose here? On the one hand, if Putin keeps fighting, big deal. If he stops, we could take credit for it and look like the good guys here. Mm-hmm. But it's typical Chinese obfuscation, right? It's pretending to be the good guy when they're clearly not the good guy here, and they are clearly not a neutral party. And the notion of the notion of the Chinese negotiating an end of this war is like you going through the Russians to negotiate the Iran deal in the middle of a war with Russia.
Which we're doing. And on the other side of, well, it's sort of the same side of the ledger, actually, but from a different angle, a report by Axios that Israel PM Naftali Bennett has told Zelensky he needs to, they're reporting he needs to surrender, whatever surrender looks like, but essentially that Naftali Bennett is trying to broker this thing to be over too, as Israel has tried to sort of middle the two.
I don't know if that's true, because on the one hand, it sounds very non-Israeli. Like, could you imagine the Israelis in the Six-Day War, at which everybody did say, hey, you guys just need to pack it up, call it a day. So it doesn't actually something like an Israeli leader would say. On the other hand, I don't know. I have no idea what they said. Is it advice that Ukraine is likely to take? The answer is no.
Well, speaking of,
the problem is when you try to negotiate with the Russians from a position of weakness, you're going to get absolutely slammed into the dirt. So the best the Ukrainians can do is fight on as hard as they can and hope that they can have some military victory on the battlefield, which actually forces the Russians to come to terms. That's the only option they have other than losing everything in their country. Because while they're losing, there is zero chance that they're going to get a cut of deal with the Russians that allows them to keep anything other than maybe the flag, and 5 inches of Ukrainian territory.
But is this opening up the Middle East and destabilizing the Middle East in a way that has Israel concerned? For example, Iran claiming a missile barrage near the U.S. consulate in Iraq over the weekend.
Yeah, I think that the Russians have very limited influence and capability to move in the Middle East beyond Syria, and I think everybody knows that. So I don't think that. I think what's terrifying to the Middle East is the opening of Iran and unleashing of Iran on them. And I don't think in the end the Russians can really help the Israelis that much against the Iranians. I think that's a pipe dream. If they think that's the only card they have left, then the situation in the region is really, really desperate. But what's significantly destabilizing the region is the same thing that destabilized Europe and put Tehran at risk. It's a White House which is encouraging aggressive people to be more aggressive.
Well, yeah. Iran, accidentally bombed our consulate in Iraq, but it's okay because the Biden administration tells us the consulate wasn't the target of the attack. Doesn't that look weak?
This is complete nonsense. A formal body of the Iranian government fires missiles into the sovereign territory of another country, and we say, well, we're indifferent to that because it didn't actually kill any Americans. Really?
Ridiculous.
That's your metric of responsible behavior? And this is the problem with this administration, which is they want to find every excuse they can find to do nothing about a problem. And, so they talk about norm setting and responsible behavior and values and all this stuff, but they duck their head in the sand if it means that they have to do something. They will accept any embarrassment or aggression or stepping over the line, as long as they can get away with doing nothing. And then when it's done, they poke their heads out and say, we are the people that stand for freedom and democracy and responsibility and liberty and international norms. It's nonsense.
What did you make of the White House briefing TikTok influencers with sort of the administration's narrative, if you will, on policy with respect to this war in Ukraine?
It ended up being an SNL skit.
I'm sort of mixed opinion on this because on the one hand, okay, that's fine. I mean, you want to get the word out and what's true and have people generate as much understanding as they're capable of about Russian aggression, this invasion, what Putin is doing, what the Ukrainians are doing and trying to fight for their homeland and so forth. But on the other hand, as Putin is shutting down Facebook in Russia and deplatforming antagonistic media, we have big tech companies in this country and in the West and Europe too doing the same thing to Russian outlets. So I just what your take on sort of the war over communications.
Well, look, I have real issues with talking to TikTok influencers since TikTok is essentially has a backdoor into China, and it's used to vacuum up information on Americans and influence Americans all over the country. So of all the platforms they could have chosen to go to me, it's irresponsible. I mean, I think we were on the right track when we were insisting that China divest itself of TikTok if TikTok was going to be allowed to operate in the United States. So in that respect, I think it's just utterly tone-deaf and stupid. I mean, I think the problem for this administration is they're obviously pandering to progressives in America. I doubt there's one TikTok influencer that they talk to that is remotely in the center, let alone right of center. And so if you're trying to lead America, you should be doing things that lead America. And, so it wasn't the conservative leadership and the White House getting together to talk to these people. It was the White House. So it's the left essentially trying to talk to the left. That's not presidential leadership in time of crisis.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano. He is the Vice President of the Catherine Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. The book, Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, thanks as always.
Yeah, and today, obviously over-caffeinated, or maybe it's just you guys.
Yeah, no, I can understand. I can understand the many sources of frustration. I think our listeners can, too. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
We all know that woke activists poisoned our universities and many of our public schools. But did you know they're poisoning corporate America as well, especially Human Resources Department responsible for hiring and promotion? American Express is one of these woke companies. Their 2021 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion report card essentially said it would hire and promote employees based on race and gender. They're even disavowing capitalism. It all sounds pretty un-American to us. In fact, the company should change their name to Un-American Express because there's nothing American about the way they are doing business. A new group staffed by young folks who represent the true diversity of America, Color Us United, is taking the fight to American Express leadership with the simple message: choose woke values or choose American values. It's impossible to choose both. To become a part of this fight, go to unamericanexpress.com. American Express has heard from woke America. It's time they heard from you. Go to unamericanexpress.com now.
40 days up to 40 pounds. Say with me, 40 days up to 40 pounds. That's how much you could lose when you join NJ Diet, because NJ Diet only takes 40 days to lose 20 to 40 plus pounds. Since NJ Diet is a contractually guaranteed money-back program,